Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you on day two of the Social Finance Forum here with Future of Good and you, so many partners across Canada. My name is Julissa Brown, who is the great granddaughter to the spiritual grandfather of Pan Africanism, Marcus Garvey. I'm also the executive director of the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners, and I'm so glad to begin with you today as we acknowledge the lands that we are all living, breathing, and thriving on. We also acknowledge and honor the elders, the original elders and stewards of the traditional practices and principles of the land. May we adopt its learnings and re-nourish the lands and its communities today and forevermore. We also acknowledge our ancestors and their stories as we made it to this country that we now call home. Yesterday, there were so many brilliant conversations in many different locations and online across Canada. And today, we get to jump into a conversation that I'm sure you all have been waiting for. We're going to be talking about where social finance and impact investing fall short. And, just based off of the title of this conversation, I'm sure that you probably have many answers and thoughts around this, but I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today who are going to be joining us to chime in on this conversation. And so I'm so glad to welcome to the stage these wonderful leaders from across the ecosystem that you may be familiar with or you may be new to. But since we'll be learning a little bit about their work today, I would love for us to get to know them just a little bit more. So we're going to introduce ourselves in a different way today, and our panelists today are going to just share or a little bit about themselves in 2 sentences. I know that can be tricky, but let's introduce ourselves as people. So let me start with who I have first here, which is Narinder Dami, who is the co-founder of New Power Labs.
Great. Thanks to be here with everybody. So I'm Narinder. I am the co-founder of New Power Labs, use she, her as pronouns, live, work, and play on Treaty 13, and have a day job of running a private family foundation, the Sonar Foundation, and have the privilege to be continuing to be working alongside an amazing team at New Power Labs and thinking about re-envisioning how capital flows so we can get capital to underfunded and overlooked leaders and communities. And my background's in the private sector, in the social sector, have been working in social finance before it was mainstream. So really excited to see the future of what we can do together.
Thanks, Narinder. We have next Jory Cohen, the Director of Finance and Impact Investing at Inspirit Foundation. Hi, Jory.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Jory Cohen with Inspirit Foundation. I think many of you know that we've committed to 100% impact portfolio, and I've been leading that transition since 2016, which was that initial commitment. While I'm not working, I am a parent, I'm playing sports, I'm trying to sleep, which often doesn't work. But I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Jory. We have Tanya Sermon, the founder and CEO of the Center for Social Innovation. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, good morning. I guess afternoon. Hi, Julissa and everyone. I'm Tanya Sermon. I'm the founder and CEO of the Center for Social Innovation. I'm a serial social entrepreneur. I've been a part of co-founding and founding over 18 social startups over the last 35 years, which makes me old, people. But the Center for Social Innovation has been an amazing platform to support over 6,000 social purpose organizations over the last 20 years and to support their work. And so I've got some really firsthand experience with what are the challenges of the social enterprise, social finance space. I'm also a pioneer behind the community bonds and have supported the acceleration of hundreds of social enterprises in the field. So I'm pretty excited because in some ways, the social finance world came out of a lot of advocacy in support of the social enterprise field, which has really just emerged in the last 15 years or so. So delighted to be here and can't wait to get into the topic.
Thank you so much, Tanya. We're glad to have you. And last but not least, we have Delphine Descamps, the impact investor at Impacts in Wards. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Delphine. My work has been focused for the purpose of investing, mainly in food and agriculture, particularly with family offices and as board member of funds and companies. I'm very passionate about ways to fight against food insecurity and food waste, as well as fight for food as medicine, which all have huge environmental and social impacts. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. It's so great to hear some of these personal things about you. Thanks for sharing. So, in this conversation, we all come to this from different perspectives. Our lived experiences really do weigh a lot in this. So, I would love to hear from your lived experience and from your lens. What are some of the main gaps and shortcomings in the current Canadian social finance ecosystem? Let's start with you, Tanya.
Well, that it's almost opening up the pool so big. Okay, so look, the Center for Social Innovation. Most people know our story. I'm going to kind of provide a little bit of a history of where, give you a sense of where CSI is right now, just to understand and kind of contextualize some of the challenges that I think we face in the social finance field, and to kind of ground us in some of the realities that the sector is facing, and it's sort of as a way to reflect. So most people know that CSI is a co-working space that's supported over 6,000 organizations. We actually bought 2 buildings in 2010 and 2014, grew to New York and in Regent Park. And COVID, of course, forced us to close our doors. And it's been a devastating set of years ever since, as we've been looking at how to pivot our business model and to figure out how to respond to the work from home movement. In actuality, things have been going quite well. After Omicron kind of, gave us a break, we've been able to kind of come back, and CSI is once again a thriving community of hundreds of organizations that call themselves home there. But we have not been, before the pandemic, we were building a next economy campaign, how to radically redesign capitalism for people and planet. And then I like to say that then the next economy happened to us. As you can imagine, with a 20% vacancy rate in commercial offices right now, and interest rates having gone so high, doubling and close to tripling in some cases, CSI has been confronted with an existential crisis. Really watching many of our peers and organizations in Toronto, and where I come from, struggling. I mean, Artscape is no longer the organization that it once was. We know that Hot Docs is also in trouble, and Sketch is kind of as just an example of the kinds of organizations that are confronted by some of the challenges of these economic times. And CSI is no exception. In March, in January, we launched, we announced that we were selling our building, one of our 2 buildings, in order to kind of address those financial concerns. And in March, we received, we had over 100 expressions of interest into the purchase of our building, and received only 2 very predatory offers. So we recently made the decision to take CSI Annex off the market. And this is sort of what does an organization do when confronted this kind of change? What is the role of social finance in this? And so yesterday I announced that we would be doing another community bond offering. We're going to do offer a bond offering at 4.5% for a 5-year term. And we're going to make that offer because that's what we can afford. Mortgage rates are upwards of 6.5 and 7% right now. And we're looking to launch a campaign to support the organization to be able to basically buy out our mortgage. And I'm telling this story because I think it's really important to understand and to address this issue of concessionary, or what other people are calling, below market, if you will, investments. One of the things that we're kind of struggling with and are kind of reflecting on is, as we have started to reach out to the impact investment world and kind of say, hey, this is what's going on for us. What is our experience of walking into those conversations, and what are the kinds of responses that we're getting? And I'll just tell you, we're getting people saying, well, that's not really in our bailiwick. We're only focused over here. We're looking at, terms that are rates that we're looking at like 6 and 7%. And we're basically being misdirected, or not misdirected, but like directed that somebody else in this ecosystem will figure this out. And so, reflecting on what is this ecosystem, where are we right now? And, And what is the experience of the players that are looking for this investment? I see it emerging. I'm excited about it emerging, but some of the concerns that I have, and I'll just throw a few of them on the table here, is, when we're using the words concessionary and discounted, why aren't we using the words impact? When are we going to start actually measuring the benefit of the social impact that is achieved as a part of that financial formula? And it's a concern for me, because that was the promise. That was the promise of social finance, is that we would be able to actually have the social and environmental returns captured as a part of that. So nobody would have to do a concessionary return. It would not be discounted. It would be a fully valued and appreciated for what the true impact of that work is. I also worry about where do we go? Where, this process of trying to find our way has really left a lot of work in the hands of the enterprises trying to find and make sense of this ecosystem. I worry that we are, even though the Social Finance Fund and the work of the Social Innovation Social Finance Task Force was led by nonprofit social impact folks, that right now the conversations that I'm hearing are very much about largely focused on for-profit returns and high returns and tech investments. And I worry that community-based, local, and marginalized, but yet high-value enterprises are being skipped over as this field emerges. And so, I lift these and raise these issues from my perspective as a way of remembering that when we're building an ecosystem, that we really have we need to look at all of those different folks. And I know that many of the players, and having conversations with folks, are working to create that breadth of an ecosystem. They're looking to be national, which is no easy challenge in this country. They're looking to be inclusive. They're looking to cover environment and social justice. All of these things are happening. And so I applaud the work that's happening, but I'm also sensitive, just from my personal experience, but also the experience of so many of our members, that we remember that local, community-based, and sometimes concessionary things are actually what make the lives of the people in our cities, our towns, and our communities that much richer, and ensure that we're able to create leverage and benefit that allows us to really, truly put people and planet first. So those are some of the things I'm on.
Thank you so much, Tanya. You definitely brought up several great points. I think that on the point of social and environmental returns being captured, I think the government is working towards figuring that out, but it's still a big question mark for a lot of people around that impact measurement and management. So hopefully more of that news will be announced soon. And also, I don't really hear folks speaking about affordability in social finance very often. So thanks for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what your thoughts are, Narinder.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So with New Power Labs, I think most folks in the virtual room, would be familiar with our work. We are a think tank do tank. We look at how capital flows to underfunded, overlooked leaders across the capital spectrum. So from philanthropy, impact investing, venture capital, and we look across diversity. So Big Ten thinking, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, citizenship status, abilities, geographical regions, language minorities, and more. And so the core part of what we're doing with New Power Labs and what our hope is to truly unlock the full potential of all of Canada. So much talent sits untapped because of existing systems, of existing structures, of bias, of processes, of who's in leadership, of kind of a desire to replicate some more traditional models when new models can be formed that are much more inclusive. So again, our work in New Power Labs is really about that, getting more capital to underfunded, overlooked leaders, with a goal by 2030 to help move $500 million of capital to these communities and to these leaders and to these founders. And so one of the frameworks we use a lot internally and externally is a who, what, the how. So it's a really important framework as we think about where have we made progress in social finance and where are some of the opportunities that still exist. So on the what, this is what we all talk about. The social, like, what is the social impact? What is the environmental impact? I think that I've been in conversations around impact measurement since I was building my first microfund in Canada 2010. We're having some of the similar conversations of how do we measure the good that we're trying to do. So there have been some great advancements in that, which is great. What usually gets left out in these conversations is the who and the how. So who are we empowering to build the solutions? Who are we empowering to be able to design the programs, the products, the services within the social finance space? And a lot of that is a function of how capital flows. And who are we enabling then to lead? The how is another thing that, it's exciting to see some really great innovation in the how. Even internally at New Power Labs, we're looking at different prototypes, blended finance, and kind of other unique ways in which we can really get different models and vehicles out there to flow capital to folks who've been historically underfunded and overlooked. So a lot of, I think, the opportunity we have, not losing sight of the what we are funding, because that's such a core part of what we're doing, but not being shy and bold around the who and the how. And then linked to that, there's a few themes that are kind of top of mind for me. So the first is the say do gap. And so I think we all know that this exists in the sector. If you look at our mission statements, our vision statements, they're aspirational. We're going to solve all issues facing society, and we're going to do it in the most inclusive, accessible, diverse way possible. That's what we are saying we are doing. And then when it gets to the doing part of it, things change. And so it's difficult. There's friction points. Our leadership hasn't really changed in terms of who's in power and who makes the decisions. We're making some small changes on the boundaries of this work, but the opportunity for scale changes still exists. Like, I think when we think about there's many investors and foundations who struggle with practical implementation of how we get more capital to underfunded and overlooked leaders. Again, in New Power Labs, we're designing for that. So we have a partnership with 26 foundations, asset managers, and working together to really change and shift how capital flows. You've had recent discussions, and even, there's a really amazing fund, CDPQ, that recently closed. But how do we actually create the momentum and have this work not sit in these siloed small funds that are adjacent to the larger portfolios, but an integrated approach to how we flow capital? Another thing is, like, we say we want inclusive teams, and we build some of these internship programs and really focus on kind of that first level of entry, which is a really important part of the process, but we don't look into retention. We have a really interesting report coming out this summer, which will shed light into how folks that are gender diverse and class diverse move up in the social finance sector. I've seen some really interesting internships in our sector where, on face value, they look great. They're supporting Black, Indigenous, people of color, people that have been traditionally hard to access these opportunities. But in design, they're actually predatory. They're unpaid. They're giving free space or free food or some additional elements to that. And so it's a say-do gap is our opportunity to do better. And we're going to talk a little bit more about data. Transparency, if anyone knows me, knows is a big opportunity for our sector. Is how do we embrace feedback versus pushing out feedback? And on a final piece, I'll say, is mindset. So I think in our sector, we continue to hold this view that we are good people, and we are probably good people. But that view makes us think that we are not racist, sexist, ableist, and really kind of confines us into this good person mindset, which can be really counterproductive if we want to change. And Dr. Dolly Chung, who's a social scientist from the US, encourages us to move beyond that mindset and engage in a mindset of being good-ish, so we can address those biases, address opportunities for us to actually, close the say-do gap and do better by understanding that we are good-ish people. Anyway, a few ideas.
Thank you so much for that, Narinder. I'm here like nodding my head. I know we're all here like, yes, I'm here snapping. The say-do gap is a really good one. Delphine, I wonder what your thoughts are around the main gaps and shortcomings of social finance in Canada.
Yeah, so I come from a lens of an impact venture investor, right? Looking to invest in sustainable companies and particularly in food and agriculture. So I get excited, but I also know there are some shortfalls. Why do I first get excited? First of all, I get excited because I think there's a very strong movement in our Western societies putting pressure on companies to be good to all stakeholders, right? Not only to maximize profit to their shareholders, but to be good to all their stakeholders, meaning the planet, the employees, the suppliers, the consumers, and also obviously the shareholders. And I see more and more founders that have impact in their DNA and in their strategy, pushed also by employees and consumers who want more transparency, ESG, and impact commitments. So that gets me very excited. I think that reporting on impact and setting goals is no longer limited to the world's largest companies or listed companies. Many companies today want to be sustainable, which means sustainable financially, but also environmentally and socially. Studies also are coming out, particularly from the World Economic Forum, one in 2021, that shows that those companies that actually embed practices that are sustainable have outperformed on a profitability and societal outcomes. By that study showed 21%, but now you're starting to see that sustainable companies are actually performing better, which is also great. So that's on the company side. On the investment side, there's definitely an increase in impact investing. It is no longer a niche. It is estimated that there is about 1.2 trillion in asset and under management from impact investors, and in Canada, today, it's estimated at 14 billion in 2023 and potentially growing to 46 billion by 2030. So impact investing is there and growing. Now, where does it fall short? Today, I think there still lacks education on what impact investing really means. I mean, the definition is pretty clear. It talks about financial returns and also making positive impacts on the social environmental side of things. So this is not philanthropy. There is returns associated to impact investing, and I think the education still needs to get there. And there are some very interesting initiatives, for example, in Quebec, led by Fondation, to educate the all the investing professionals around what impact investing really means and how do you incorporate that into your strategy. I think another shortfall is that I think there are certain sectors that are underfunded, and I particularly focus here on food and agriculture. When you look at the venture dollars that are invested in this space, it's only about 7%. The biggest sector is transportation with electronic vehicles and energy also, but there is really a lack in funding in food and agriculture. I think a lot of investors still think it's too risky. It takes too long, and I often hear, how do you make money in the food and ag space? So that's also a shortfall, and I think the biggest problem, and it's been touched upon also by the other panelists and yesterday too, is that sustainable companies are not valued as they should be, or those that are not sustainable do not see their valuations discounted as they should be. In the venture space, to value a company, oftentimes, almost always, you look at comparables, right? So you take a company in a specific sector, for example, in food, and then you look at another company that's almost identical, a competitor, and then you look at the valuations, and then you'll say, this one was 3x revenues, 4x, 2x, whatever the x is, and you're not really comparing the impact, right? You can have one that's doing things right on environmental and social standpoint, and the other one isn't, but you're not taking that into consideration into your valuation. And I think that's where it really falls short, is how do you put dollar amounts on impact to be able to give that supplemental, valuations to those that are really doing things right. And just the last thing I would say also is in terms of having a long-term approach in order to assess which ones are successful portfolio companies or not, is probably also another area that needs needs to be worked on.
For sure. For sure. You brought up a great point that I'm hearing a lot of people talk about is the fact that funding doesn't seem to be balanced across sectors at all. And so that's for sure something that folks should be looking into. Like, how can we find or access a bit more balance across the sector? And the other part is around the globe, we're talking a lot more about impact weighted accounting. And so hopefully in the coming year, we'll be able to bring that into action here in Canada. Jory, I would love to hear what some of your thoughts are.
Well, absolutely. My fellow panelists are too smart, and they've identified so many. But I'm gonna give this a shot. I'm gonna use an example dating back to 2016, when Inspirit Foundation made a commitment to 100% impact portfolio. We believe we were the first in the country, and we know one of the first in the world, and we were keen to make the commitment, and we made it January 2016. But then we hit pause. Because while we made the commitment, we didn't necessarily have the most concrete plans to implement the commitment yet. We had a very good idea of how to, but we didn't formally pen the strategy. And it took us about a year and a half to write our investment policy statement. And I think the most critical piece of that statement was our definition of fiduciary duty, which very explicitly is defined as transcending financial performance only. So I believe it's the intent is to optimize both financial performance and impact performance. And I think that's really crucial. And that is a mindset that hasn't fully been adopted yet. And I'm talking specifically about foundations in the philanthropic sector, where I believe it's truly our duty to generate impact with every dollar that we have. So yes, on one hand, impact investing certainly has grown. There's no question, and that is really encouraging. On the other hand, I do see that there's certainly room for improvement, mainly from the philanthropic sector, to align all of our dollars to generate impact or to align with our mission. And if I was to pose the question, do I think that all foundations should be making impact investments? The answer is absolutely yes. Do I think all foundations should be committing to a 100% impact portfolio? I really do. There are some real structural challenges that need to be overcome first in order to make that happen. But I think if we can think about fiduciary duty in a way that isn't limited to financial performance, making that commitment to leverage all of our assets to align with our mission isn't as difficult as we think. And then when we get there, we can really have some fun and get more creative. And so while we do see a greater flow of impact investments, that's wonderful. What we're not really seeing is the willingness or ability for investors, and specifically philanthropic investors, to do whatever you can in a responsible manner to align as much as your capital with your mission as possible, as tightly as possible. And to do that, often what you're going to have to do is remove some financial return in order to generate the impact that you desire that's really tightly aligned with your mission. One thing we've done in Spirit, we like to formalize our plans and our commitments. And so right in our IPS, in our investment policy statement, we have a new asset class as of this year that commits to no interest loans or 0% loans. So we're not expecting any financial return with these investments or these debt instruments. We're just extending capital to mission-aligned projects and organizations that we just can't pass up because of who they are and what they're doing. And eventually, I would love the gap of, let's start investing more. Let's start talking about fiduciary duty. Let's commit more of our portfolios to impact. And also, let's think deeper. Let's try to deepen the impact of those impact investments as much as we can when we can. Thanks.
I love that so much, Joy. You said some things that some people might not want to hear, like the fact that some of the financial return should be removed. And, that although commitments were made, it took some time to put some of the pieces in place. But these are the hard truths of the work that we're doing. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Now, so we've talked about some of the shortfalls and where, some things can be corrected within our ecosystem. I would love to hear now, some of the solutions. How can we fill these gaps? And so, Narinder, data collection is a topic that the ecosystem often views as onerous and challenging. What is one practice that can be put in place to create a positive culture around data collection and accountability in Canada?
Yeah, such an opportunity here when we think about how we get better, how we know where we are, our baseline, and how we know how we progress and what enables us to progress. Without data, we're really operating in a deep vacuum. And this might be the electrical engineer in me, but I make decisions on data. And the absence of data makes it really hard, not only for folks like me who run foundations or, nonprofits, but also for decision makers, for policymakers, to be able to understand how to allocate capital. And so, if I go back to our framework, the who, the what, and the how, again, we've done some good progress on the what, which is great, and we need to continue to refine that so we have, a better sense of understanding the impact we're trying to create. The who and the how, very much limited. And I'm going to focus on the who part of it, which is a core part of the work we're trying to tackle, or we are tackling at New Power Labs. Now, I'll give a few examples and just share kind of 3 or 4 kind of things that need to change. And we need to address the hesitancy to start. We need to think about reducing the barriers and the replication of the asks that we're having. We need to figure out how this work is funded, and then we have to figure out how this work is connected. And I'm going to give you an example of just starting and the value of starting. So as some of you may know, there are significant data gaps when it comes to transgender and non-binary individuals across Canada, and it limits our potential to understand a lot. And in 2021, Stats Canada pioneered a change by allowing individuals to self-report their gender in addition to sex at birth in the census. So this made Canada the first country to collect census data on transgender and non-binary people. Now, it's filled with shortcomings, ton of gaps, ton of debate around, is this the right approach? How can we adapt it? But this initiative represents the essential beginning. Census data on transgender and non-binary individuals provides a benchmark then to assess various other aspects of information. So, if we want to understand what representation on leadership looks like, the distribution of capital looks like, all of these elements need to have a starting point. So though the initial efforts to gather data on transgender non-binary individuals are not perfect, it's acknowledging and addressing these gaps that paves the way for more comprehensive, inclusive, and intersectional data for the future. And if the kind of point I want to make here is starting, even imperfectly, sets a precedent and creates momentum and opens the door for improvement, what links back to the Social Finance Fund is on collecting the data of who. I think this is my 5-year kind of conversation of we really need to start to collect the data on who is getting access to capital at the start of our capital flow and not 3 or 4 years later when a good percentage of that capital has already been placed. And then just to briefly touch on the other pieces, replication of asks. How do we centralize this? How do we do this in a way that is low barrier? How do we fund this work? Because right now, I can speak from first experience, funding this work is not happening across the sector. And then how is this connected? So, the mindset that we have as a nonprofit at New Power Labs is a deep partnership approach. Our co-founders, CFC, Coast Capital, Duca, Wes, and others, OTF and others have been really instrumental to that. And now we have 26 other asset managers we're working with. So how do we actually figure out the connection of this? I feel like you're gently trying to, Jaleesa, tell me my time is up. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Narinder. We really appreciate you and your passion towards the data collection. Very important topic. Jory, so, we definitely spoke on removing some of the financial returns. But on the other side of that, there's something to be added. And so in the topic of blended capital, I wonder if there are some tangible next steps that investors can take going forward.
Yes, I hope so. I think it's our job as philanthropic investors to truly optimize that financial performance and positive impact. And in some cases, that does mean removing a return, financial return, for deep impact. And overall, what I think we ought to be doing is get the cost of capital down as much as we can in a responsible manner. We need to pass on those savings to to our investees. And in order to do that, whether it's zero interest loans, whether it's blended capital and bringing in some philanthropic dollars or grant money, that's something that we ought to be exploring as foundations and as a sector. And I know everything I say isn't necessarily for everyone to hear at this moment, but I do think these conversations are important, specifically for philanthropic investors. I don't always intend these comments to be for impact investors writ large, but for foundations and philanthropic sector, I do think we have that duty to think about cost of capital and decreasing it as much as possible, especially when it comes to our private investments and to anything that's tightly aligned with our mission.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective, Jory. And so, Delphine, as we're figuring some of these things out, what are some of the ways that we can better align investors and social entrepreneurs around impact investing?
Yeah, so I love to spend time on this and try to see what people are doing and investors are doing in Canada, but also abroad, to get like a sense of where can there be better alignment and what can we innovate around. So the first thing I would say is that I'm very, very in favor of more reporting and setting impact targets, and that's the only way we're really going to be able to determine and compare those companies that are really doing things right versus the ones that are really doing things wrong, and allocating the dollars and the best dollars and the biggest amounts to those that are really true impact sustainable companies. So, while some people may think that too much reporting is gonna be a nightmare for everybody, I think it should be seen as something very positive. The second thing, these are ideas, right? How about redefining success scorecards by investors? We talk about ROI, return on investment. How about doing an ROI, return on impact, and valuing companies with a success scorecard that has these two components? There are other things like, how about aligning carried interest to impact targets and not only to financial returns for investors? You see some funds, and particularly in Europe, the Article 9 funds that actually have that, where carried interests are tied to impact targets of their portfolio companies. Something I hear a lot also is, to be able to put value dollars on impact is we will need to price nature. So if your company is having a negative effect on biodiversity, for example, it's a huge risk and it's ultimately a cost. And when that gets into the P&L, that's where you really see, again, those that are doing things right and those that are doing these things wrong, and you can value properly. And then maybe last thing is, how do we rethink the fund structure that the traditional, 80-20 fund structure that has a limited lifetime versus a more holistic, long-term holding company that could be structured to really support these companies that need time to develop. So that's something also that a number of people are thinking about. And then blended finance, how do you put certain philanthropic dollars and venture capital in the same company at the same time to make a really positive impact on the company and its funding. So these are a few ideas, but I find them very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I love that. So many really great ideas. I hope that folks are taking notes so that we can pick some of these actions up after this. And so, Tanya, how can we ensure that funds are reaching the communities that need them the most rather than staying within insular ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. I just want to applaud my co-panelists here who have raised such important answers to that very question. And in particular, I want to just notice one of the things that I'm learning in this conversation. It's something that I suspected, but now I'm like, just listening to Delphine and to Jory in particular about what is a philanthropic investment versus what is an impact investment. And while I was here, I just went to do a little check in on what is the difference of social finance compared as opposed to impact investment. And I think this is an important clarifying framework for us. And Jory, InSpirit has been an incredible leader in that commitment to 100% impact. And I think it's, first of all, I just want to applaud you as one of the sort of drivers of that kind of approach, where when you put your money into a foundation, you are making it 100% focused on impact. And that's a huge change in the last 10 years. So, I think that's a very, very concrete way that we can create a richer ecosystem. Delphine, when I hear you talking about the different ways that impact investors and companies need to value the full cost of nature, and look at the full, like a return on impact would be a brilliant and extraordinary step in the right direction, giving those organizations that are doing really, really concrete work on the ground. And I think one of the things that we really need to remember is that finance is a tactic, right? Finance is rates, returns, and risks, and it's a whole. What is Yuval Harari says? It's an imagined reality, right? So finance and even the concept of a business per se is an imagined reality that we actually have the power to create or to shift or to change in order to ensure that the imagined reality brings out the very, very best for the actual reality. So, how do we create the mechanisms in our imagined reality that allow us to ensure that we have food security, or our agriculture innovation that is regenerative, or that we're actually supporting those social purpose organizations in the charitable and the nonprofit sector that maybe an impact investor won't even go near. And so I guess for me, one of the things that is really, really important is that we find ways out of the legal divide. So in the last 20 years at CSI, I've watched as we've struggled between the for-profit, nonprofit B Corp versus social enterprise versus and this struggle, because we do live in this dualistic legal model. And I see that the impact investments or the financial strategies are also falling into this dualistic framework. And I think we just have to maybe recognize that for now and look at ways that we can be inventive and creative at developing an imagined reality that brings out the very best, that protects people and planet, so that we actually have a hope in hell of surviving on this planet. So I think we're doing great work, but I think there's lots more to be done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tanya. I guess I'll chime in for the last one and just say that I feel the big gap here in social finance is that we might be missing the E in DEI. We've come to a point where we recognize that, there needs to be more diversity. We're seeing that people need to be included more. But when it comes to equity, it seems like these diverse folks that we're inviting to the space are being sent to the back of the line. And that's not equity. And so let's encourage ourselves to figure out how we can, complete DEI and, have it functional in addition to all of the brilliant things that were shared here with our panelists. So Jory, Delphine, Tanya, Narinder, thank you so much for your brilliance and your work within our ecosystem. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to share your thoughts and perspectives with us. And to ecosystem, thanks for taking the time out to listen to us. And we hope that you get connected with us all on LinkedIn.
Thanks,
Enjoy the rest
Jalissa.
of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jalissa. You're awesome. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.